Get ready to see plenty of new faces in this Chicago Bears offense next season. And this defense could see some changes as well.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, I want to set the stage for the offseason ahead when it comes to how this Bears roster is going to change. I want to look across the board, mainly with the offense, but also with the defense, at what kind of turnover we could be in for. A number of players set to become free agents this offseason. I think a lot of them not coming back as free agents. Plus, you can add in the Bears draft picks are going to change things. And all of a sudden, you're going to see a handful of new starters on offense, perhaps a couple of new starters on defense, and a bunch of key rotational contributors off of the bench, all likely to be new players from outside of the organization. Some of that's just natural turnover from year to year, and some of it may reflect what Ben Johnson wants and what Ben Johnson prefers, and also Dennis Allen's preferences on the defensive side of the ball. We'll also touch on some potential salary cap casualties that could definitely change this picture of the Bears roster. Naturally, the offense is the side of the ball that's going to have more change. The offense is the side of the ball that I think A, needs more change, but also B, has more natural change coming with players set to hit free agency that were major contributors this season that likely aren't coming back, and a handful of starting spots up for grabs this offseason for players that likely aren't going to be retained from last year. So like if we think about this Bears offense as a whole, right away, that Keenan Allen at wide receiver is going to be a free agent. Both of your starting guards and center, Tevin Jenkins, Matt Pryor, Coleman Shelton, all set to be free agents, plus a number of key backups. And we'll go through them here in a moment here. But all four of those guys, we talked about it as starters. It would not surprise me if none of them are back. I mean, it's possible you bring back Matt Pryor as a backup guard, or maybe even Coleman Shelton as a potential backup center, but I don't think any of those four guys will be back as starters. I think if the Bears were going to bring back Tevin Jenkins, we would have heard more about that, or there would have been more of an effort to do so up to this point. I guess it's not totally out of the question, but it's sort of an assumption I'm working from at this point, that the Bears are not expected to re-sign Tevin Jenkins. Keenan Allen is also a little bit up in the air, and that's going to depend on the price tag. But given how much he was getting paid this season, and given that Rome Odunze is rising up into a number 2 receiver type role with DJ Moore, that there's not as this huge need to re-sign Keenan Allen. And I would guess, unless he takes a very team-friendly salary cap number, that he's likely not to return either. And so that right away is 4 brand new starters from presumably, or at least 4 players that need to be replaced. I mean, I guess Rome Odunze would kind of take over as a starter from within the organization, but you're going to need to add more at wide receiver to replace Keenan Allen, even if it's not a 1-to-1 comparison. But then new starting left guard, new starting center, new starting right guard, plus a bunch of other depth players that we'll go through here, I guess now. Because if we kind of think about this position by position, of course, like quarterback, right? Caleb Williams, Tyson Bagent, they don't need to add anything else there. They could choose to add a veteran third-string quarterback if the price is right. It was the right name that maybe knows Ben Johnson's offense or something along those lines. But for the most part, not expecting a ton of change or turnover at the quarterback spot. Running back, you've got DeAndre Swift and Roschon Johnson coming back. You're probably going to need more of a true number 3 running back in there because Travis Homer and also Darrington Evans are both free agents. You have Ian Wheeler, the undrafted rookie free agent from last year, coming back, but you're going to bring in some sort of depth at running back, but it doesn't need to be big money top free agent, right? This is veteran minimum type of change, not like a drastic overhaul to the running back position. Tight end, you've got Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett under contract still. We'll talk about whether that might change a little bit later on in the podcast today. But I mean, as the roster stands right now, you have a number 1 and number 2 tight end under contract. Mercedes Lewis is going to be a free agent at tight end. We'll see. He's expected to play another season. We'll see if that's with the Chicago Bears or not. But at least you've got some continuity there. Quarterback, running back, tight end is mostly held together. Then you start shaking some things up at wide receiver and on the offensive line. We talked about Keenan Allen already. With DJ Moore and Rome Odunze, you're going to need probably a better number 3 wide receiver there because you've got Tyler Scott, and that's it for wide receivers under contract. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Tyler Scott. Everyone else is set to be some form of a free agent this offseason. You're going to need more than 3 wide receivers on your team, and you're probably going to want a better number 3 wide receiver than Tyler Scott. Scott can compete for that role, but it feels like in an ideal world, Scott is your number 4. Maybe you re-sign Colin Johnson, the preseason standout, as a number 5 wide receiver. You re-sign DeAndre Carter as a kick returner and a number 6 receiver. That's certainly in the mix. The Bears did claim someone off of waivers, a former Lions special teams receiver, Maurice Alexander, and they've got a couple guys on futures contracts. But as far as players who were here last year, you're going to need at least 2 more wide receivers added to this group when it's all said and done for your 53-man roster, and they're going to add a bunch more, just training camp guys throughout the process here. So the wide receiver core going to look a little bit different. The offensive line is going to look drastically different. The only players you have under contract right now are Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright at starting left and right tackle, and then you've got Karana Magaji as a backup and Ryan Bates as a potential backup interior offensive lineman. You're going to need 3 new starters plus a couple of backup guards and probably another backup tackle because Larry Borum is a free agent. Jake Curhan is a free agent. Bill Murray's a free agent. Doug Kramer's a free agent. I believe Murray and Kramer are restricted free agents, so they're likely to be back. But still, you don't have a guard really under contract right now. None of the guards from last year are under contract. They claimed Jordan McFadden off of waivers from the Chargers, but players who were here in Chicago this past season, you have 0 guards left under contract right now. That means you're going to need 4 of them, right? You're going to need to, between the draft and free agency, you're going to need to sign and draft at least 4 guards. Okay, maybe you re-sign Matt Pryor and Bill Murray and Jake Curhan to all be backups, and then you get 2 new starters, right? But you're going to need to get deals done with at least 4 guards. That's a lot of potential change for this offense. Plus, at least 1 center, and depending on what you want to do with Ryan Bates, maybe more than 1 center there, and you're going to need another backup tackle. Karana Magaji can't just be that guy. Again, whether you're bringing back Larry Borum or not, the Bears are going to have to make some real decisions here. And I would guess, a lot of these guys are previous regime guys. Borum was around for a while as a 5th-round pick in 2021. Maybe Ben Johnson comes in and says, sorry, we want to go in a different direction. Jake Curhan was a Seahawks guy with Shane Waldron. Might want to go in a different direction there. Same thing with Matt Pryor. Brought in under the previous regime to fit what they wanted to do with that team. Well, now it's Ben Johnson's office with Dan Rochar as offensive line coach. He's not going to have the same connections or allegiances to a lot of these linemen, and maybe they ultimately decide to go in some different directions and bring out a lot of new, fresh blood. So, we're talking, when we're not even camp body guys, but just truly real NFL contracts, 10 different players on offense. When you think about a number 3 receiver, maybe 5 or 6 offensive linemen and 2 or 3 wide receivers, all of a sudden, that's a lot of new bodies, and not just training camp bodies, but real players who will play real roles on your Bears team. Again, not all of them have to be new from outside the organization, but given the new coaching staff, I would imagine plenty of them will be. Now, on the other side of the ball, with Dennis Allen's defense, there's going to be some change too, but not as much as the offense, but there's potential here for changes to the starting lineup, and certainly a lot of your key backups from this season are about to hit some form of free agency. So we'll see who might come back and who might not, and what this defense and how it could look different under Dennis Allen in 2025. Next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's the icing on the cake. Download the FanDuel app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win that first bet, you're going to score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. The Bears' offense had some clear starting positions with guys not under contract. They don't have a guard from last year under contract right now. Pretty clearly some forced change coming on that side of the ball. The defense, on the other hand, is easier to keep intact in a lot of ways, but there's always turnover every offseason, and I don't necessarily expect the same starting 11 from 2024 to be the same starting 11 in 2025, even though technically and literally all 11 starters from last season are under contract on this Bears defense across the board. Your entire defensive line, both linebackers and your starting DBs are all under contract for 2025. You don't have to make a change at any of those spots. Now, big picture here, we would like to see the Bears bring in another pass rusher to start opposite Montez Sweat. You have DeMarcus Walker under contract. You can move DeMarcus Walker to the bench and be your number 3 rotational defensive lineman who can kick inside and play defensive tackle. I mean, this is something we kind of talked about for the last couple of off seasons, right? The Unique Ngakoue off season, and then this past year, like, are they going to bring somebody to replace DeMarcus Walker, or are they going to rely on DeMarcus Walker as a starter? I think that remains another storyline this offseason. So, like, that's one way that you can change your starting lineup without having to necessarily, lose any of your starters to free agency. But otherwise, across the board on defense, most of your upcoming free agents are all backups. Important backups, but backups nonetheless. When you talk about the defensive line, you've got under contract, your defensive ends are Montez Sweat, DeMarcus Walker, Austin Booker, Dominique Robinson, and then that's actually it. Those are the 4 defensive ends you have under contract. Darrell Taylor's a free agent, Jacob Martin is a free agent, and Daniel Hardy is a free agent. Sort of don't necessarily expect Dominique Robinson to keep coming back, but maybe he'll make it back to training camp. But his spot on the 53-man roster is definitely going to be in jeopardy at this stage of the process. But Sweat, Walker, and Booker is not a good enough defensive end rotation. You'd like to bring in a starter there, but you're going to need even another backup in there potentially as well. I mean, the Bears were rolling 6 and 7 deep at defensive end this season because you just need fresh bodies in there, and you want to be able to then take your bigger defensive ends like DeMarcus Walker, move them inside to defensive tackle on pass rushing downs, and then take another defensive end off your bench and put them on the field. We know that under Dennis Allen, this Bears defensive line is going to prefer bigger and especially longer limbed defensive ends. He likes to have length and size at that position. I think Darrell Taylor, who they traded for from the Seahawks, fits that mold. He's got good length and he's got decent size. Whereas Jacob Martin, who they signed from the Colts, was a Matt Eberflus guy, a little bit smaller, a little bit less length. I think he's a lot less likely to come back. And in any case, either guy could be toast if Dennis Allen wants to identify different guys that he knows and trusts a little bit better than guys that were brought in by the previous regime at defensive end. Defensive tackle, similar story. You've got Dexter, you've got Billings, you've got Pickens. Those starters are pretty much set with Pickens as one of the backups, but you're going to need, 2 or 3 other defensive tackles here. All 3 of your other DTs are set to be free agents. Byron Cowart, Chris Williams, Jonathan Ford. You'd like to see the Bears go out and make a more significant investment at that position just to give you better depth. Given how much Zach Pickens has struggled, you don't necessarily want to count on him as your top defensive tackle backup option, but you also hope he can get coached up a little bit more this season and start to play better in year 3, but you can't count on that. So whether you re-sign Chris Williams as a restricted free agent and then bring in like one more veteran guy in there, and okay, it's not like drastic turnover the defensive tackle position, but position that has room to change here quite a bit nonetheless. Then you go to linebacker, where you've got your starters, of course, in place, but it could be an interesting offseason because Jack Sanborn is a restricted free agent, and backup special teams player Eamon Ogbongbemiga is going to be a free agent. Is Noah Sewell, your 5th round pick from 2 years ago, is he ready to step into a top backup linebacker role? You're still going to need more depth there anyway because you just need guys to play special teams. But Edmonds and Edwards can hold that down. And if you re-sign Sanborn as a restricted free agent and you have Sewell there, maybe that's your top 4, and then you just grab a veteran minimum special teams player to play the rest of that. We'll kind of see how that ultimately plays out, but I'm not expecting much change overall at the linebacker position compared to where the defensive line could shake up and also where the secondary could shake up, because you've got Josh Blackwell and Jalen Jones and Amir Speed all entering restricted free agency. You've got Adrian Colbert and Tavarius Moore at safety entering free agency, and you've got some questions about who all is going to be back at this position. And we'll talk about salary cap casualties in a bit here. But we know that Tyreek Stevenson's standing in the previous coaching staff was in question. I think he'll get a clean slate here to kind of keep working. Not that they're going to cut Tyreek Stevenson, but just more like from a starting lineup perspective. Do the Bears go into this offseason saying, yes, Tyreek Stevenson is for sure our starter? Or do the Bears go into this offseason saying, let's bring in a little bit more competition there in case Tyreek Stevenson doesn't take that next step forward? They were rotating in with Terrell Smith last season. Both are young guys from the same draft class that have some promise, but has either one stood out as like this clear-cut great starter opposite Jalen Johnson? Not necessarily. I think there's also a possibility that Dennis Allen could move Kyler Gordon back to the outside and then sign a slot cornerback and make Stevenson a backup that way. I mean, I don't think that's likely, but I think it's on the table. As far as just because Eberflus did things a certain way with these guys does not mean Dennis Allen is going to do the same things. And I think Kyler Gordon could do either at a really high level, and it'll depend on where Allen wants to allocate those resources for those players. Then at the safety position, it sounds like Jaquan Brisker has just recently been cleared for football activities. That sounds like encouraging there, but he's entering the last year of his contract. Kevin Byard is entering the last year of his contract. It remains to be seen how much longer either one is going to be a Chicago Bear for the short and the long-term future. So even if they're still around this offseason, you're likely going to be drafting drafting at least one player at safety, adding more at the safety position. I don't know if Elijah Hicks and Jonathan Owens are players that the Bears feel like are future starters there, or if they need to get a little bit more talent in at the safety depth chart to feel like you've got long-term options and you're not going into next offseason, 2026, with a need for 2 new starters at safety because you just kind of ran it back with the same guys and don't really have a contingency plan or a long-term plan there of how you're going to properly staff that position. So it's not as though that the big turnover on defense is coming imminently, but I think there's some sneaky potential here for the defensive starting lineup to change and some key rotational pieces on defense to change. And some of that could come down to just salary cap. The Bears have a couple of contracts on both sides of the ball that are making more money perhaps than their production justifies, or you could get similar production for less money from other players, or just say, you know what, we've got other guys we want to put in those roles that we're not going to want to keep paying this player the amount of salary his contract is currently owed to him. So we'll look at some of the guys who the Bears could cut to save money, but still then need to replace on your roster next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Betterhelp. What do you want for your 2025 story? Every January and now February brings a new chapter, 365 blank pages waiting for you to fill. If there's part of your life you want to rewrite or a plot twist you've been craving, why wait? Life isn't about fleeting resolutions. It's about taking control and becoming the author of your own story. Think of therapy as your personal editor, helping you craft the life you deserve. It's not just for crisis situations. Therapy can help you develop healthier coping strategies, improve your relationships, and empower you to be the best version of yourself. Whether you're facing a challenge or just looking for personal growth, therapy is a powerful tool to help guide your journey. Whether it's learning how to set boundaries or tackling stress in new ways, therapy can help you develop skills for a better tomorrow. Even if you've never tried therapy, the benefits are clear. Finding someone to talk to and gaining fresh perspectives can make all the difference in navigating life's up and downs. Write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, betterhelp.com/lockedon. The Bears are naturally going to have turnover on offense and a little bit less so on defense. But Ryan Poles and Ben Johnson and Dennis Allen have the opportunity to make a few more changes if they like to. And there's a certain luxury that I think comes from where the Bears are financially, where they're not so cash strapped that they need to start cutting players to make salary cap space. The Bears have plenty of salary cap space right now, and you could fully retain everyone who's currently under contract at their current value and sign enough free agents and draft picks to fill your roster and have a good team. They're not a team that's in a desperate position to cut cash and find savings wherever they can and maybe lose some talent as a result to create more salary cap space to make the moves they want to make. But they also have the luxury of looking around the roster and saying, you know what? That guy might not be as good as we thought he was, and we're paying him a little bit more than we need to, and I would rather save some money on his contract and still afford to be able to replace him with an equally good or even better player that might cost the same or even less than what that player brought. And sometimes it can be tough to make those decisions. Sometimes it can be easy to make those decisions. And I think there's a handful of veterans across this Bears roster that all really stand out as strong candidates. I don't want to say likely candidates, but let's say strong candidates. Like, for example, I've seen people throw out the possibility that technically both TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds are contracts that, yes, the Bears could release them and save money on their deals. But the Bears are not going to release Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. That would be a stunner. I guess it's not out of the question if for some reason Dennis Allen just decides he doesn't want one of them, but they're both quality linebackers. I don't think the Bears are going to cut either linebacker, even though they would technically save money on their salary cap by releasing those players. You're not going to find much better than them in the offseason, and it just doesn't seem like it's worth the move there. But other guys are a little bit more movable. I think the one that stands out the most is going to be tight end Gerald Everett, who was pretty abysmal this past season, was definitely brought in to be Shane Waldron's guy, had worked with Shane Waldron before, never really found a lane in this offense. He's supposed to get paid $6.5 million this year to be the Bears' number 2 tight end. If the Bears cut Gerald Everett, they would save $5.5 million. They would only owe him $1 million lingering against their salary cap space. I think they would be better off paying him $1 million to not be here versus $6.5 million to be here. I still think he's a good player, and I still think a coach like Ben Johnson could probably get more out of Gerald Everett than what the Bears got out of him. I was a big fan of the signing. I thought he could be a massive addition to this team and give them a dynamic number 2 tight end in this offense. It didn't work out that way. I don't think he's all of a sudden, though, a terrible player either, but he wasn't, this was a Shane Waldron signing. And so I would expect Ben Johnson and company will say, listen, Gerald, nothing personal, just business, and move on from Gerald Everett as your number 2 tight end. The one I'm most curious about is safety Kevin Byard. They signed him last offseason to a 2-year deal. And all along, we said at the moment the Bears signed him last year, that 2-year deal was really a 1-year deal with a team option for a second season. We got through the first season, and now it's really up to Ryan Poles whether or not he feels, and Dennis Allen, whether or not he feels Kevin Byard was good enough to justify bringing back for a second season at an elevated salary cap number. So year 1, last year, 2024, he made $6.5 million. Not a bad price for a starting safety, but now that jumps up to $8.5 million. He gets a $2 million raise from year 1 to year 2. That was built in intentionally, right? So that he wouldn't cost as much up front. And if the Bears cut Kevin Byard this offseason, they would save $7 million. So they could keep him for $8.5 or pay him $1.5 to not be here. And that's sort of the idea of backloading the contract with the idea that if he played really well, he would earn that $8.5 million in the second year and you'd be happy to have him at that price tag. And if he struggled in his first year, you could cut him and really not owe him that much money, save a bunch of salary cap space, and replace him. Now, I think Kevin Byard was pretty good. I don't think he was elite. I don't think he was great. I think there were ups and downs this season with Kevin Byard. And so I can't get a good read on what exactly the Bears will be doing at the safety position because Jaquan Brisker throws such a wrench in this, right? Because we don't know how reliable Brisker is health-wise. He's had concussions each and every season and missed more and more games each season, like that's some instability at the other safety position. So you're going to want to get some sort of long-term plan to replace Jaquan Brisker. So then at the same time, do you want to force yourself to replace Kevin Byard? Or do you, or then you're going to need, if you keep Kevin Byard, you're going to need two long-term plans because then Kevin Byard will be a free agent. Or are the Bears confident enough in Brisker and they say, no, we're going to re-sign Jaquan Brisker. We really like Brisker. He's locked in. So then it's easier to cut Kevin Byard now and you only have to address one safety position because you feel really good about the other spot. Like the wild card of Brisker makes it impossible to predict whether Byard will be back or not. That's the challenge for me right now. When they signed Kevin Byard, I would have told you, I think I did tell you on this podcast, I thought it'd be a 1-year thing. And this offseason, they would cut him and then try and get a long-term piece and kind of get another young safety to pair with Jaquan Brisker for the long term. But now Brisker's no sure thing either. So, I mean, at this point, I think because Byard's under contract, I expect Kevin Byard to be back with the Chicago Bears. But it would not surprise me at all if they decided to go in another direction. But it's going to be tricky. Dennis Allen likes versatile safeties that can play in the box and can play deep. Kevin Byard certainly fits that bill. He's, 31 at this stage of the process, turns 32 in August. So he's old, but he's older, but he's not like washed, but he's not the guy he was earlier in his career. But like all things considered, I just wonder if maybe, I don't know, because if you're trying to replace both safeties, are you going to draft two safeties this year to both be long-term options here? Because you're not going to, if you're keeping Byard and Brisker, you're not going to sign a big-name free agent safety. So then how do you sort of plan to replace both safeties at the same time in the future? Like that's where this is a little bit above my pay grade to sit here, and I can't predict exactly what Ryan Poles is going to do there. A similar conversation with DeMarcus Walker on the defensive line, I guess, right? He's a guy who most of his contract is not guaranteed. You'd owe him less than $1 million if you cut him. His cap hit this year is $6 million, just under. If you cut him, you'd have to pay him 5.2, or you'd save 5.25, I think is what the number ends up being. So like it'd be really easy to cut DeMarcus Walker, but you do need defensive end depth, and $6 million is not crazy expensive for a good defensive line depth. But is DeMarcus Walker good defensive line depth? That's kind of the question here, right? Like we don't know how highly the Bears view DeMarcus Walker. We don't know how highly Dennis Allen views DeMarcus Walker. If he looks at him and says, yes, this is the kind of defensive end I love in my defense, they're keeping him for sure. But if the Bears look at Walker and say, he's been all right, but maybe has kind of underachieved from what the Bears were hoping for when they signed him to that 3-year deal. He's had 3.5 sacks in each of the last 2 seasons. 3.5 and then 3.5. I think there was a hope he could be at least a 5-sack guy. He had 7 sacks his last year in Tennessee. You're hoping to kind of get more production out of Walker than the Bears have gotten, despite him being healthy for all 17 games, both seasons. He's been durable. He's been reliable. So I think they're going to keep him, but you just don't know. And then one more we'll throw in here real quick. Ryan Bates, your backup center who didn't play much all season. Ryan Poles traded a 5th-round pick for Ryan Bates last season. He's getting paid $4 million, and none of that's guaranteed. If you want to cut Ryan Bates today, you'll save all $4 of that $1 million. Is Ryan Poles after one season going to say, all right, my bad, even though we didn't really get to see Ryan Bates play? Certainly I hope they don't rely on Ryan Bates to come in and be a starter. Like make Ryan Bates your top backup and pay him $4 million a year to be a highly paid backup. I'm okay with. If your plan is to start Ryan Bates at guard or center, Ryan Poles will be making a mistake. I can say that right now. If he's one of your starters this season, that is a mistake. He might be a very fine player, but you need to aim higher. You can't go cheap on the offensive line. You can't skimp on the protection for Caleb Williams, especially because Bates couldn't stay healthy last season and didn't play great when he was healthy last season. So those to me, Byard, Everett, Walker, Bates, those are the big 4 potential salary cap cuts. If you cut all 4 of those guys, the Bears would save almost $22 million on the salary cap space. And that's enough money to sign Trey Smith, alone. Just those 4 cuts signs you Trey Smith from the Kansas City Chiefs if you're so inclined to spend big money on that guard. So you can see the temptation to say, we can replace a safety, and you don't really need DeMarcus Walker in there, and you're getting rid of Gerald Everett for sure, and then Ryan Bates is just kind of a backup anyway. You can replace him for cheap, and all of a sudden you can talk yourself into freeing up $20 million and having some more cap space to sign outside players, to give Kyler Gordon a big contract extension, whatever it's going to be for Chicago. There's room to add salary cap space. So That's going to make for a fun offseason ahead. Free agency is going to be a blast. The NFL draft is going to be exciting. And we've got plenty of time to go through all of those different opportunities. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to check out Locked On NFL for all of your Super Bowl coverage from the league-wide perspective. It comes out twice a day. If you want to make Locked On NFL your second listen, it's Tyler Rowland in the morning and then again in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. All the biggest football topics each and every single day. Just make sure you're coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.